यश्चन्दसां वृषभो विश्वरूपः छन्दोभ्योऽध्यमृतात् सम्बभूव समेन्द्रो मेधया स्पृणोतु अमृतस्य देवधारणो भूयासं शरीरं मे विचर्षणं जिह्वा मे मधुमत्तमा कर्णाभ्यां भूरिविश्रुवं ब्रह्मणः कोशोऽसि मेधया पिहितः श्रुतं मे गोपाय। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। In this series of talks, we shall examine ways to live life maturely. We shall go into how we may identify different forms of narrowness that creep into our relationships and how we may remove them. Insight is something everybody has to come upon by oneself. It cannot be borrowed. One has to see for oneself how one has become mechanical, how one's values do not have true life in them. In the mantra that I chanted, the Taittiriya Upanishad says, Om, the Supreme Truth, is covered by Medha, the word Medha meaning human cleverness. At many other places, we take the word Medha in a complimentary sense. Here it is described as an obstacle. To be clever, to be smart, to be knowledgeable, to have great Grantha Dharana Shakti, ability to remember what we have studied, read in secular and spiritual terms, is very desirable as we normally think. But that very cleverness can come in the way of our truly harmonizing with life, with everyone. For that very cleverness can make us more and more selfish. In this talk, Insight and Intelligence, we shall explore the possibility of something other than logical abilities and emotional skills. This something will bring new life to both our head and heart. So the thrust of this evening's talk will be to unravel the intelligence or to throw light on what is involved in coming upon such intelligence in ourselves whereby our intellect does not impede harmonious relationships, and for that matter our emotions too do not come in the way of true relationships, as all of us basically wish to live in love, in harmony, in a sense of oneness, togetherness. How that is facilitated by some subtle faculty in us which is above both head and heart. On one hand, it is above head and heart, and on the other, its reflection ensures the harmonious blending of head and heart. And that faculty, which is thus other than head and heart, is referred to as intelligence, as insight. So we are going to touch on the nature of this intelligence. The speaker does not claim that he has this intelligence. In fact, he knows that to claim any such thing is the denying of intelligence. As I shall show, the true nature of intelligence is very unique. It's a constant openness of mind. The moment you say, I know it, you lost it. As Swami Chinmayananji once remarked about humility, what a strange thing humility is. The moment you say, I am a very humble person, you lost it. For in that statement you made a comparison. True humility is when you do not even think about humility. In fact, the intricate thing about all these values is the pure value, true value is when you don't think about that. It is spontaneous. When you think and make a theory of a certain value, you lose it. You know, there is that good old story. A father brings a son to a guru and says, please tell my son not to eat so much of sweets. And the father is very hopeful that when the guru says to this young boy, my son, my dear child, don't eat so much of sweets, the child will listen. Father must have said to the son a number of times. The son did not listen, or maybe the son got more attached. Sometimes within the family, within the known members, counterproductive results come about. When we advise each other, since we are known to each other and there is a lot of background to each other, we don't see each other with fresh minds when we know each other. And that lack of freshness of the mind very often leads to a certain extra obstinate decision. If you say, I should give up, I am not going to give up. Even any idea I had to give up is now kept in abeyance. So the father must have been frustrated, and he hopes that the guru will say, the guru or some saintly, elderly, pious person. I am sure most of you know this good old story, how that guru says, oh, is that so? You want me to tell your son to not eat so much of sweets? Give me some time. Come after 15 days. And the father is surprised to say such a simple sentence. In fact, the language, the syntax, the everything I have supplied, how it is to be said, and why is this guru finding it so difficult? And after 15 days, when the father again brings the son, the guru lovingly says to this young boy, my son, do not eat so much of sweets. That's it. Father is puzzled, and later on, privately, the father asks, how come you did not say the first time I brought my son? The guru, a good guru, which many of us are not, This good guru that fellow was said, you know, when you brought the son last time, I myself was eating a lot of sweets every day. And when you said advise your son, it's very hard. So for last 15 days, I gave up sweets, and now I say to him. Now, there is one plane of do and don't, should and should not, but with no contradiction to that plane, with no breaking or blasting that plane, there is at the same time another plane of operation within us where we are aware of these should and should not, putting their pressure and forming judgments of others or of ourselves. Till our last breath, we cannot be free from ideas of what is right and what is wrong. But some are just going by these ideas, and some others are aware of the process the mind goes through. And in being aware of should and should not, there is room for freshness, there is room for discovering a possible inapplicableness on some occasion of a rule. Every rule made by somebody at some time is in most likelihood for good of the individual or a society group. Lot of do's and don'ts, prescriptions surely have a background. All of us have our own backgrounds, our own traditions, and nobody can live in a sort of licentiousness. But the human predicament has been different people have different backgrounds, and everybody holds on to some idea that they have of what is right, what is wrong, what is beautiful, what is ugly, some idea of what is the true goal of either whole life or a particular activity, and what is not, and all this, and there is friction, there is a whole lot of conflict between people and conflict within oneself. I think this is right, but my son thinks that is right. My own son disagrees with my value. Oh, what a shame. In this way, a father, a mother could go through a turmoil. Very often, in such a turmoil, there is not much of room for going to the first principles, basic principles, or the very source of values. The father and pretty much the son too are attached to their picture of what is right. The son says to the father, "You belong to the Victorian generation, don't apply it to us." And the father says to the son, "My son, you don't have experience at all. You are only 39 years young, or 15 or 39, that could vary. You are too young." On that too young also, what is young? There are a lot of different opinions, by the way. Now, like that pious person who just did not get carried away by the sanctity or validity of eating or not eating sweets with regard to being right or being wrong, he looked at it and looked at it from a broader angle, was aware of his own lifestyle, and then went slowly about it. Can you and I also have a certain deliberation, not just deliberation through thinking, but deliberation of seeing, of watching, whereby life may get a healing touch. Life may have a touch of harmonizing rather than everything becoming rigid. In our mind, there are many opinions, sometimes tearing us apart, pulling us in different directions. Perhaps we do have a certain faculty within us where we are gentle on ourselves, not that we pamper ourselves, gentle not in the sense of letting ourselves do anything, but we are not jumping to conclusions. We neither live in some false self-righteousness. I am the virtuous man and all others are going, to sixes and sevens. Nor are we in undue guilt or shame. I will never be able to live properly. I have not read much. My childhood was spoilt, therefore this is what I am. And thus thinking of numerous causes, thinking of numerous reasons as a background. Nobody understands me. My case is, I have a history. I too wanted to be a good person once upon a time, but such and such things like this, I'm not talking of myself, hope it is very clear. Though I am very much in the same boat as all of you are, but this is not at all an autobiographical sketch in a specific manner. I am talking about human life. We tend to remain in a set of thoughts, and when I say, can we take a look at the way we are living with certain gentleness, it is that mature seeing where energy is not dissipated in blame, guilt, shame, or fear, or the sense of superiority, self-righteousness, and so on. Rather, we spend this energy within us for understanding ourselves. Intelligence and insight are to be looked at in the context of this evening's talk as something that harmonizes both love and reasoning. Love is basically regarded as an emotion. Reasoning is regarded as a logical ability. You know well how in the corporate language too, they talk about IQ and EQ. Intelligence quotient, which is mainly logical abilities, and emotional quotient, which has gained certain importance from the early 90s, where it is the ability to understand and manage emotions. What emotions? One's own? No. Daniel Goleman, the author of Emotional Quotient, has categorized in his early essays in a five-fold manner: understanding one's own emotions. Second, managing one's own emotions. Third, understanding others' emotions. When someone is angry, can you figure out what actually is happening in her or him? And fourth is managing the other person's emotions. And fifthly, Goleman puts it, some of you are surely familiar with those topics. Fifthly, there is also under the emotional literacy or emotional intelligence the ability to network, ability to handle diverse people in a corporate setting. While one may oneself belong to a certain department, research and development, one has a sense of what others are doing, and one is able to extend a hand of friendship to anybody from anywhere. And at crucial times, this kind of being well related to people of different departments of the same company has been found out by these studies, by these psychologists, to be of great value. So networking has been considered a great aspect of emotional intelligence. So there is IQ, intelligence quotient, logical abilities. Then there is EQ, emotional quotient, the matter of handling emotions. Many a time you look at somebody who is angry and you get agitated. Someone remarked that when you find somebody angry, don't jump to a conclusion that he is finding fault with you or he is sore with you. In quite likelihood, that person might be seeking help. The angry person might be actually miserable and is asking for help, but his way may be shouting, yelling, and accusing you. To understand that, it may not be so also sometimes. To understand that requires certain observation. One cannot put it hastily into a particular pattern. I know this. He is finding fault with me. No, he may be seeking help. Of course, when we say this, it will be a terrible thing if next time you find somebody angry and say, you need help. That will jeopardize everything. That will make him or her even more angry with you. But it could be a fact that she or he needs some help. It applies to our own anger also. Rather than saying, I don't know why I get so angry, I must control this anger, and so on, it makes sense to examine this business called anger, this mental movement called anger, and see that this is basically an insecurity. This is basically a sense of being left alone. This is basically a sense of not being competent or not being capable of handling something, and then it expresses as anger. Suppose that is the case with us, that understanding, that seeing makes the anger get transformed. A lot of our emotions are up and active because we are supporting them through certain conclusions. If we take a second look at those conclusions, and in the process we see that those conclusions are false, those emotions subside. So is there something which is other than logic and emotion? And if there is something, how do we arrive there? This perhaps will look very similar to you. To you it will look similar to creativity, to what they call out-of-the-box thinking. There are these expressions. There is also what is called lateral thinking. Ordinarily we think in certain ways, 99 out of 100 people, and then it is said 1 in 100 are able to do lateral thinking, in which they see the whole thing from a very different perspective and they discover something. They solve problems which nobody else solved. Perhaps there is something in common between what I am trying to talk this evening and this out-of-the-box lateral thinking, creative thinking, and all that. While there may be some common ground, there is also a lot of uncommon ground or difference. Let me touch on the possible difference. A whole lot of literature on lateral thinking, creative thinking, etc., has its focus on faring better in the world, solving mundane problems, maybe how to invent, how to be creative in a given field. You are already an engineer and you want to be a creative engineer, and your goal is set. I want to come up with something new and tell me if there is any way to do it. And a lot of such literature is no doubt very popular, for it raises new hope. While there may be some common ground, the uniqueness of our spiritual outlook towards this insight or intelligence is this relates to life itself. It goes to the root of your personality. It does not operate within the field of your being an attorney or engineer, your being a father or a teacher. Rather than being limited to a certain field, this is going to the root of issues, and if I may try to simplify it, this is about being human. This is about taking a second look at ourselves as a human being. Gandhi was an attorney. Gandhi was also a political worker, a social reformer, but there was something in him which touched the hearts of a lot of people. Was it his creative abilities in politics or social service or in law or any other particular field? Certainly not. Most of us, if not all, have watched even the movie, The Gandhi. In that, a certain touching scenario comes before our mind again and again. Many, I am sure, would remember it. There is a lot of communal violence, and a certain Mohammedan, in front of his eyes, lost his son. The son was murdered, and the father somehow escaped and ran away, and this father is very agitated. In the East Pakistan or East Bengal, what now is Bangladesh, in that area this episode happens. And Gandhi is talking communal harmony and all those things. Everybody is very angry, very agitated, and they want to burn more of each other's houses. And Gandhi is crying, please don't make each other blind, don't make each other deaf, don't make each other widows or widowers. Stop this nonsense. But they are not listening. And then there is this scene, this father who lost his son comes and says, can you get back my son? You are talking this peace and harmony. I lost my son. And Gandhi very softly, after a pause, says, wait a minute. Here is this boy, a Hindu boy. In front of his eyes, his father was killed, murdered, slaughtered. See, this boy has lost his father. You have lost your son. He has no father, you have no son. Why don't you adopt this boy? Look at him as your son. And I will ask this boy, my son, look at this gentleman as your father. Here there is going beyond ordinary constructs of the mind. And to go beyond these ordinary constructs of the mind, one requires an inner silence, not a silence forced by our saying, I should be silent. The silence that comes in us when we see that our reason, however smart it may look, is not with full information. Our reason, alas, has bias. And when we see that our so-called love also is with bias. Whatever is cultivated, whatever has been nurtured over many years, while serving some purpose, has the limitations, scientifically speaking, of that particular background. So if we see that my reasoning has limitations, then rather than being within the field of this reason coming up in my mind, I am able to stand outside the box, out of box. In the same way, when I see my emotions are rooted in a certain limited conditioning, not suppressing them, please be clear, but not fanning them too, I am able to look at their limitations, and in seeing their limitations, there comes about a silence. Probably that Mohammedan father didn't expect this kind of answer. He perhaps expected some standard religious answer. It is your fate. Look into future now. We have some karma theory, and in Islam perhaps there are other theories, Allah's will or something. Some such thing he expected, but out of the blue comes this suggestion: you adopt this boy would adopt you. In every one of us, there surely is a great potential for selflessness. Ordinarily, alas, even in the prestigious colleges and schools, universities, and these temples of learning, as we call them, there is a tremendous amount of cultivation of the intellect. Not only there is information explosion, there is also a great amount of encouragement to be smarter, to be able to use information faster and faster. As even Mr. Gates would title his book, Business at the Speed of Thought. So we are after speed, and that's not wrong, but there is a neglecting of, we would say heart sometimes, but this evening I would say something that is other than even heart. Both head and heart, other than head and heart. Maybe Mr. Gates, Bill Gates, will write towards the evening of his life a book on not business at the speed of thought, living from heart. Maybe, or he will not. He may enjoy those books at least. Perhaps he will turn to those. Now, a lot of skills, achievements in business, in technology, etc., of which this country is a great, grand display on a daily basis, is known to all of us. In a corner of our heart, we know it has also led to a whole lot of new problems, stress and loneliness and whatnot, fear, tremendous amount of fear too. This is almost contradictory, but we can see this is bound to happen. For in becoming clever, in our embrace of Medha, as the Taittiriya Shruti said, Brahmanaha koshosi medhaya pihitaha. As Ishavasya also would put, Hiranmayena koshena satyasya hiranmayena patrena satyasya apihitam mukham. The face of truth is covered by a golden lid, no ordinary lid. Science and technology are part of that golden lid. Good dress, big house, nice car with GPS and all those, you name it, all those features. And everywhere around the world, everybody has some golden lid covering the face of truth. Linguistic skills sometimes, when we are able to speak well or write well or put things in some nice expression, when we are able to sing or dance or any skill, It gives us a certain self-importance, and then you had it. Then the selflessness and the psychological simplicity deep within is covered. Medha, the cleverness in man or woman, covers the pure truth. The golden lid of self-importance or sense of achievement covers the child in you. When we take a look at great classics like Ramayana and take a look at even the personality of Sri Rama, you find there were Sri Rama in Ramayana, Yudhishthira in Mahabharata. They were very adept in archery or in political science. It is said they were Sarva Shastra Parangata. That was the word used. Expert, adept in all the sciences. In our books, old books of India, there are some 64 branches of knowledge mentioned. Thieving also is one of them, stealing. Chaurya Vidya or Chora Vidya. And one is supposed to know that too. So, the heroes of Ramayana, of Mahabharata, were on one hand very adept, very skilled, lot of medha, they had lot of knowledge. But through their character depiction, Valmiki or Vyasa shows that Rama or Yudhishthira were above all wonderful human beings. Sri Ram, even as there was a very strong bias or lobby against Vibhishan, when Vibhishan comes for Sharanagati, he is able to look at things without falling for that lobby, without hating them also, without a grudge against all those who said, don't take Vibhishana into our camp, but at the same time maintaining an inner poise, calmness, sees, and it is as though the two hearts meet. I wouldn't say Sri Ram did some very extra sharp thinking to accept Vibhishan, who is younger brother of the great enemy Ravana. Enemy's younger brother, you are giving political asylum to him, you are considering making him an advisor to you. Are you not digging your own grave? So everybody except one or two gave such advice. Don't send him back immediately. This brother of the enemy does not deserve to even take 5 minutes of our time. No way. No, sometimes enemies and enemies' brothers could be undeserving. But here, Vibhishan was a very pious, saintly person who honestly advised and tried his best to dissuade his elder brother, Ravana, from all his wrong deeds. And then finally comes to Sri Ram's camp. And then Sri Ram, after listening to some advice, says, well, friends, I see the whole thing differently. Vibhishan is a sincere person. I accept him. Ram accepts Vibhishan and then embraces him, shows so much love to him, and you know the Ramayana story. Sri Ram makes Vibhishan right away the king of Lanka. There is a coronation also. He says, I accept you, and you are not just with me in no capacity or without any position of your own. I declare you the king of Lanka, of course, in exile, out of place, out of one's country. Like, the Dalai Lama, His Holiness or His Highness Dalai Lama, he is regarded by Tibetans as the ruler of Tibet in exile. So, Vibhishan enjoyed the status long ago. If you meet the Holiness Dalai Lama, tell him, Vibhishan, in our place also we had one. I'm sure he knows it. Now, I am raising this issue for there is another dimension to this story, which all may not know. When Vibhishan was made the king of Lanka by Sri Ram, before even the war started, or in and through the war, some people raised a doubt. Sri Ram, what are you doing? Now, you have often been saying that if Ravan changes his mind any time, you are going to stop the war and forgive him, and go back with Sita to Ayodhya. So what if tomorrow Ravan says, I seek your forgiveness, don't touch me, save me, spare me. You have declared Vibhishan the ruler. How will Lanka have two rulers? Sri Ram pauses for a moment. I am not sure if this is in Valmiki, but in some version. Ramayana has hundreds of versions. So many versions. Adhyatma Ramayana and Tulsi Ramayana and Valmiki Ramayana. In some version it is given like this. After a long pause, Sri Ram says, no problem at all. If Ravan surrenders tomorrow, well, I have already made Vibhishan the king of Lanka, but I would not let down Ravana. I will make him the king of Ayodhya. This is very wonderful thinking. And Sri Ram has so much security, sense of security. He has tremendous sense of well-being. It is not the sense of well-being when somebody has run away or avoided things. In fact, Sri Ram is 100% ready to rule the kingdom, as he will. After a short while, the war is over, he gets back to Ayodhya, and we know he rules the kingdom. He doesn't say, after living all those 14 years, now I am in no mood to. I got adjusted to ashram life now. This janjat, as you have in Hindi, I don't want this janjat. Bharat, you have managed all these years, just carry on. No. In and through 14 years of exile, Sri Ram maintained the sense of belonging to Ayodhya and his swadharma of being a ruler. But behind and beneath that role playing, there was that foundation of selflessness, and there was tremendous sense of well-being, in work or out of work. You and I are sometimes experts in some fields, have won awards and trophies, but leave alone losing a job, when we have even a demotion, or when there is the prospect of our job going, let us say, we suffer. There is a lot of agitation. There is a lot of negative energy coming in us. This shows that cultivation of the intellect is such an inadequate thing in our life. And the so-called love, sentimentalism, so-called, I am a friend of all, a mindless, friendly nature. I just love hanging out with friends, My brother was very much into studies and all, but I am a very friendly person. You ask, we are two brothers in our family, poles apart. He is the achiever. I am not an achiever, but ask anybody in my town, or now also. As regards friendliness, I am the very friendly person. Everybody loves me. And I am LA, love all. I love all, one says. That kind of loose friendliness conceived in a narrow way is not what we are talking of. When the sentiments of the heart and the reason of the head are in proper place, and there is something other than both of them, this is coming upon the intelligence. This whole series we have titled as Talks on Insightful Living. For though we have made insight and intelligence this evening's theme, really it is something that pervades through all human endeavors. When we take up, let's say, goodness and love tomorrow, and other topics, as you have glanced at the themes for this series, work and cooperation, attention and awareness, peace and freedom, compassion and forgiveness, I would dare say that each of these comes from that source within us. And that source, on one hand, is so hard to define, but on the other, is well pointed out by saying what it is not. Let me make an important remark here. If we conceptualize this intelligence within, this insightfulness within us, and we want to have this intelligence, we include it in some prayer, let us say, I want to be insightful. However well-meaning and sincere that prayer may be, by looking at it as a concept, you cannot arrive at it. You will be more and more frustrated by making it a goal. This is where I perhaps will sound like an iconoclast now. Harish ji very nicely and humorously said, apparently is iconoclastic. The Upanishads, the Vedanta, are known for the language of neti neti, negation. As you ponder more and more on the teachings of Upanishads, neti neti meaning not this, the English translation, more and more you can see that it is not an activity of thinking. It is not a mechanical way of saying, I have this thought that I am a learned man. Okay, to be truly spiritual, I negate this. By saying I negate, will it go? Ideas of I am a successful person or I am a failure. A lot of ideas. In traditional Vedanta literature, we call this identification. And the rishis of the Upanishads, the sages, have said, when identifications are dropped, one realizes the self. Atma Sakshatkara are all talked about. Now go into what this dropping the identification could be and what this negation could be. The true negation cannot be putting another thought on the existing thought. It has to be of the nature of seeing the present thought and seeing how I am clinging to it and seeing how it is really meaningless to cling to it. If you see how your pride, even on an ordinary note, in day-to-day parlance, if you see how your pride is a burden you are carrying within you, then there is a letting go of it. Then there is a dropping of it. So the interesting question, which may look like abstract, but if you are a bit attentive, you will find, in attentiveness, you will see that there is no abstractness here. It is rather very simple. Thought, that is thinking, cannot eliminate thinking. Though popular examples go, with a second thorn you can remove the thorn that is stuck in your foot. And great Vedanta classics, Atma Bodha, the text says, Kataka Renuvat, there is a certain seeds of a plant called Kataka. In olden days, to clean water, which let us say has dust particles floating all over, they would sprinkle some Kataka seeds. Kataka Renu could be dust or small seeds of the Kataka, and these Kataka seeds form a filmy layer, and they then collect all the dust on the surface and at certain depths also. This film settles down. Today you may have alum and some other processes to purify water. So these Kataka Renu, Kataka seeds of some plant, they clean. In that way, Atma Bodha has said that Vedantic thoughts like Aham Brahmasmi, I am the divine truth and so on, are such thoughts which catch hold of all other thoughts, which are like dirt from the Vedantic point of view. To think I am superior to somebody, to think I am inferior to somebody else, to think, oh, what an immoral person I am, or oh, what a dull-witted man I am. All these are like the dust which needs to be cleansed. Be awareness, be pure. And the Vedantic thoughts from scriptures, thoughts from holy books, thoughts, gather these thoughts, and then there is no thought at all. You are not in the grip of any notion. You are free from all ideas. It is said. So, am I here to say that Atma Bodha has one wrong shloka? I would not dare say that. I would say that even in the classical Vedanta literature, if there are such examples, they are wonderful ways to introduce, they are wonderful ways to reassure the student. Read this, go on. The Vedanta itself has always talked about, pointing to the slender, this thin streak of the moon, let's say second or third day of the bright fortnight. The moon is a very thin streak. How do we show thin streak of moon to another person if we have been able to recognize, identify? There is what is called Shakha Chandra Nyaya. You first show a branch of a tree and then say, now go to the upper thinner branch and between the two leaves, can you see now? So first you show the branch, then you show the leaves, then you say, look between the two leaves, there is the thin streak of the moon. Shakha Chandra Nyaya. First show the Shakha, branch of the tree, then show the Chandra. In the same way, deliberately, knowingly, before the great Upanishads would bring us to the neti, utter negation, they would keep us a bit comfortable. They won't disturb us. Otherwise somebody may just drop. Neither here nor there would be the case then. Ito brashtaha tato brashtaha. There is an expression. Gone from here and gone from there. Then nowhere. One has ended up nowhere. So there is a loving, gentle touch there in a whole lot of scenarios. To make a quick mention of a parallel, someone like Adi Shankaracharya, even in his commentaries, at one place would defend the concept of prarabdha. He would say that even upon enlightenment, all other karmas go away, but prarabdha would not. And there would be in something like Viveka Chudamani a string of verses. You can even call it prarabdha mahima shlokas. But later on, he would say, if these arguments convinced you, let us tell you, you are mistaken. At the end of it all, and says, gently saying, how can prarabdha apply at all? And that is also dismissed. So erect and then dismiss, it's a teaching technique. So our effort this evening is not to go into some commentary on what scriptures have said. I made a passing reference to scriptures, for they have, I more and more clearly see now, I more and more clearly see the Upanishads have touched on a much greater depth than what ordinarily meets our eyes. Our extra effort in these talks is to take a look at these things from scenarios of our daily living. For insight and intelligence, there is no bringing the intelligence, bringing the insight. There is only the dismissal of immaturity. Put aside immaturity. Put aside any conclusion born of inadequate information. And in order that you may put aside, obviously, it is not somebody who tells you this is based on inadequate information, it is you who have to see. If you yourself see that this hurt in me or that pride in me is rooted in limitations, in conditioned knowledge, then there is the abandoning of it, dropping of it. If you see that this thinking is a mechanical process, this is how I have been thinking from childhood. Those days my issues were small things, now these are big things of the business, of work, involving greater amount of money or other resources, more serious issues. But the basic tendency is so repetitive. In childhood also, I wanted attention, and all my emotions rose out of this desire for attention. And now, even as the CEO or president or holding an exalted position, basically I feel I am hurt deeply when certain people from whom I expect attention do not give me the attention. So, have I changed at all with all this learning, with all this education? No, I am verbalizing it here in the talk. But if you don't verbalize and you don't even conform to this lecture, it is not a matter of remembering some words of Chidananda or X or Y. It is not a matter of bringing to mind some example, some analogy. All of them are of limited help. If you directly see the mechanicalness of, on one hand, your reason, on the other, your emotion. Where mechanicalness is seen and not able to bear that seeing, because in seeing as though there is a heat coming into the picture, they go away. Mechanicalness goes away. Mere habit goes away. Mere conformity to a pattern goes away. Not able to stand the heat of inquiry, the heat of non-verbal inquiry, the heat of inquiry of the nature of seeing. Then there is the rising of intelligence, rising of insight. Alas, many a time we won't do this, for we think that deep within us we are blank. Deep within us we are a zero, we are a void. And the truth of the matter is, the opposite is true. Aham Brahmasmi can be translated in 1,000 ways with lot of specific context in mind, I would venture to say one of the translation of Aham Brahmasmi could be, I am in my true nature the fountainhead of millions of solutions. I am the source of millions of solutions. But not knowing that deep within me I have such creativity, I cling to what I studied in college or school, what I read this morning in this book, or what some so-called authority said. And I have been able to have a certain position in the society. For others are also doing the same, or are basically using second-hand information, and I have been able to gather more of second-hand information and organize it more systematically, so I am ahead. But alas, second-hand information is second-hand information, however well organized it may be. When will you touch the situation by yourself? That would have a beauty. Aham Brahmasmi is dropping our attachment to the field of the limited emotion and limited reasoning, and in that letting things happen. I came across a statement by Einstein when he discovered all this E equals mc square and energy, mass and all that. While delivering his talks at one place, he says, every bit of mass has tremendous amount of energy. For 1 gram of matter, multiply it by speed of light squared. Speed of light itself is a huge number. And then m multiplied by c squared. That is the E. So while explaining this, an analogy he gives, I really laughed at it when I heard that. He says, every small particle is like a rich man who doesn't spend. For it has so much energy, but it is holding it. Every nucleus is like a billionaire or more who doesn't spend but conjuice. Every nucleus is a miserly billionaire. Very humorous. Now, here we are saying every one of us, in the core of our being, has tremendous ability to see, to solve, to set right our own life, which is not different from, or which is not a watertight compartment from others' life. When we set our house in order, automatically there would be a great amount of order coming around us. The good old stories would put it in very, legendary fashion. Around a pious person, even criminals would be peaceful. Somebody said to me yesterday in Los Angeles that his grandfather used to tell him, up to some 1 mile radius of the area where Buddha would be at the center, to 1 mile radius, a lion would not pounce upon a deer or rabbit. That is a manner of putting it. So Buddha, he did not go and do anything to the lion, but our belief has been in those languages. Buddha brought total order in himself. And when there was that total order in himself, no conflict, no fear, he stationed himself in pure love, which then can express in the heart, in the emotions. He stayed at that source which is the source of all reason. And then that intelligence would illumine the faculty of reasoning. So there is the faculty of reasoning, there is the faculty of feeling, thinking and feeling. But the source for all or both of these is a certain inner principle, and we would say Buddha stood there and the house came to order, his house, his life. He could not, even if he wanted, hate anybody, which doesn't mean that he would allow any nonsense to take place. He would openly and in a straightforward way say to the other person, sorry, I won't agree with you, you are doing something wrong. So in that order, at that center in Buddha's individuality, there was order around too. That was so with all the rishis, various saints. So let me pause here, take some questions. At the end I would summarize, but in one line, to see the limitations of reasoning, how mechanical, pattern-based habitualities, to see the limitations of our emotions, how mechanical they are, limited, rooted in conditioning, rooted in some background which may not be relevant anymore. In seeing these limitations of head and heart, neither suppressing them nor allowing them to go berserk, in gentle seeing, a certain restructuring takes place and the inner intelligence illumines both the faculties. In the light of all this, we find that a certain higher force deep within us can illumine the dark corners of the very structures of feeling and thinking. Our sentiments are then free from any prejudice. Our thinking is free then from all selfish calculation. Emotional skills and logical abilities are blessed by the intelligence that is released by this deeper fountainhead in us. Only then we have true freedom. Only then we have true harmony, with a sense of oneness, with no ego coming in between, with true objectivity, with true concern. We shall be living and meeting every event in maturity. Om Shanti.